Today I'm joined by somebody I've worked with for a long time, and she is kind of looking after all of us in that she guides one of the most important, most significant oversight views as associate editor of Daily Maverick. Welcome, Ferial Haffajee.
Thank you very much, Stuart, and for your kind words.
How do you plan a day in a world where every second the news changes? Gone are those days of those magnificent publications behind you. Gone are the days when I don't even subscribe to a newspaper anymore, I'm sorry to say, but it's a reality. How do you plan in advance so that you know that your team stays on top of it all the time?
So I think planning has become a lost art. It goes back to a time where the media set the agenda and you would start early in the morning. By the end of the day, you have a neatly packaged either television bulletin or evening radio news show, or you have a newspaper for the following morning. Obviously, that's gone now. Most people are their own media. You'll know from if you're on X or if you're on Facebook or from how you get your news. It's largely through social media. So I find instead that learning from my colleagues at the Daily Maverick, you choose a few things to be specialist at and build an audience that way. If it's around the values of building a country, shaping a world, understanding the media's role in that world, then it becomes a little bit easier to rise above the noise of a social media universe.
What happens when there's a change in a story that you've been tracking? There's so much fake news. How do you avoid getting involved in that to start with?
So, news happens and things change all the time. So, the story that you may have been trying to tell, I think that many people were so scared heading into this election. I detected in our audience a great deal of anxiety about where our country would be on June the 30th. In fact, you find a counterfactual is that the outcome of South Africa's election was counter to the worst punditry about how it might turn out. And the story behind how that happened, where we find ourselves now, tells you a story of perhaps a more robust democracy than many of us may think that we live in. And it has been a pleasant surprise. Obviously, we have a long way to go, many issues to deal with, but I think that South Africa surprised on the upside when you consider all the elections happening in the world right now.
One of the things that really scares us as people who are following developments in our country is what happens to those robust investigations by incredible journalists who work with you, like Paulie van Wyk. I mean, I really physically worry for her well-being. But, you know, how do you look after them? How do you take care of them? How do you assess the risk?
So our editor Branko Bricic and the deputy editor Gillian Green, they have systems in place to check on the mental health and the security of investigative journalists like Polly. There was a recent study which came out from the International Consortium for Journalism, done by Dr. Julie Bossetti. It was called The Chilling, and it looked at the Daily Maverick's women journalists and found that the biggest risks we face is of online violence because people get attacked, dragged, um, humiliated in the online forums like X, etc. And then that can create a real world risk. So that study is something we're considering very carefully. And there is more of a focus now on the mental health and the physical safety of journalists. People like Polly, I think, are quite fearless. I was on a webinar with her the other evening related to the developments in the VBS bank saga. And many of our audience members asked the question you're asking, Polly, do you fear for your life? And she said that because she allows the facts to lead her, she's always completely trusts in the information she puts out there, in that it is built on a series of facts, on deep forensic and investigative work, and that she trusts she will be safe, taking, of course, the regular cautions that you have to.
Tell me about the way that the elections have turned out. So the DA had to step away from the table. What does that mean in reality to South Africans? How robust is our actual opposition in its different forms in the different provinces and nationally? How do you see that playing out? Or what are the realities? Why would they rather be in opposition than go along? I guess they really didn't want to get involved in just being a subservient partner.
So the election turned out in interesting ways. The Democratic Alliance is now actually a part of the government of national unity, rather than retaining only an opposition role because of how the results shaped. There was no one winning party in this election. The ANC and the DA became the lead partners in negotiating this new thing called the Government of National Unity. They're in that with about 7 other parties at Parliament. A couple of more parties have been given significant roles, like Songezo Zibi of Rice. He's now the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Yeah.
So we've chosen a very different model of government in our country. We've said that we're all in this together. It's a model that was used in 1994. And I do pray that with this new unity in government, and also a built-in internal opposition there, we might see better things for South Africans. And what are the things that South Africans have been telling us they are most concerned about? When I was on the election trail studying this election very closely, the biggest call was for jobs. So employment is issue number one. We'll all know that the cost of living is spiraling. So cost of living, second biggest issue. Third, people want to feel safe. So crime and corruption are the third biggest set of issues. So we have to keep our eye on what this new government of national unity does. Obviously, the Democratic Alliance joined President Cyril Ramaphosa's government. John Steenhuisen took the role of Agriculture Minister, and others, Siviwe Gwarube is now the Basic Education Minister. Very exciting, 33 years old. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what a new unity government with many younger people in it is going to mean for our country. I do think it leaves our democracy in a stronger position than it was at the beginning of the year.
I see some definite green shoots.
Yes.
The Minister of Cogta just this week, I believe, was talking about the municipalities that aren't delivering or are failing or are
Yes.
corrupt. Though the teams that are running them will be dismissed and there will be new teams re-elected. Is this just lip service? Who's checking? Who's following? Who's holding them to the account? Is that really what the opposition's there for?
So Minister Velenkosini Shlabisa, he's the Minister of Local Government and COGTA, which is Cooperative Government and Traditional Affairs. He knows that in 2 years' time, there's another election, the local government election this time. And I think with South Africans making their voices felt in two ways: one, in how we voted, and secondly, in the numbers of people who said, we just don't trust this, and who didn't come out to vote. So I think there's a lot riding on the next 2 years, because it's clear the writing is on the wall. No party won an outright majority. There were messages in there from their communities that said, you've got to get going now. So I hope we are going to see that imperative come to the fore. There's no time for long bureaucratic processes. You have to see things start to happen. Government has placed a team into Durban, eThekwini, which has really seen better days. Poor City is suffering, so there's a very top-class team which is working there to quickly try and turn around the fortunes of that city. I'm hoping the same is going to happen in Johannesburg, certainly in Tshwane, and then Ekurhuleni, the industrial heartland, struggling as well. So I do hope we're going to see attention paid to our cities and to our local governments.
How are those teams assembled? Where do they come from? Who makes them up?
Well, the Department of COCTA, which is now led by Velen Kosini Shlabisa, they choose intervention teams in terms of Section 164 of the Constitution. They create a very well-known group of people. So that's happened in the Free State, and it's now happening in the city of Durban or eThekwini, where they choose people who are highly skilled at forming these interventions. They go in, they really are fix-it teams, and I think we're going to see more and more of that happening.
Is government still working with the 120 great businessmen, business people behind the scenes, those who look, Adrian Gore and top businessmen who said, we're putting our hands up for this. We don't see a lot about that. Is that because the wheels are grinding in the background?
So I do think we see a lot about that. The reason we haven't had load shedding for well over 100 days now is because of that work that's happening. So, just to explain, it's the National CEOs Initiative, which is where those top business leaders work. Then they work with the presidency's Operation Vulindlela, led by a wonderful civil servant called Rudy Dix. And from that work, they're busy with ESCOM. So the fix there is clearly a result of that. Then, secondly, at Transnet's still in a lot of trouble, but the signs are there that that CEO initiative, Operation Vulindlela, starting to turn things around. The third area where I think we must see gains, pick low hanging fruit very quickly, is in the third area of work they've chosen, which is crime and corruption. So that grouping is doing very well, and it's a talk which I'm planning called the Fixers that will focus on their work and will look at the macroeconomy and the macro social impacts, which we are in fact seeing. And the most visible example of that is in the fact that we haven't had load shedding for well over 100 days now. Many people were skeptical. They said, come June 1 after the elections or May the 30th, we're going to see load shedding back. And in fact, that hasn't happened, because I think you are seeing real reforms starting to happen. It's touch and go, it's early days, but I think if we didn't believe in what Barack Obama called the audacity of hope, then I think it makes for a grim outlook on country and world. And I do think we have reasons for hope.
That gives me great hope, because
I hope so. I hope I'm right.
yeah, and listen, you've never been a Pollyanna. You've always been a realist. We love the fact that you and other journalists like you are really gripping on with all that you can. When we look at some of the social media comments from some, I would say, ill-informed and undereducated, perhaps, individuals, it's frustrating. So, one's tempted to stay away from social media, stay away from the
Yes.
news, but you've also got to be realistic. You can't be an ostrich. And the fact that you believe there's hope and you're living with the realities of it every day, that's great. And keep doing, keep fighting the good fight for all of us, because we really, really appreciate it. And I hope that you know that we do, because you're doing so much more than any one individual can do, as much as we like to get involved.
Stu, there is something I'd like to chat to you about, and that is like South Africa's soft power. And I use that term to broadly describe those things that are not easily quantifiable in the national accounts. And in that, we have to count our media as a gem, our judiciary, and our civil society, which I guess is organizations that both fight corruption but also organizations like Gift of the Givers, which keep the wolf from the door just repeatedly, the storms in the Western Cape, um, working in war zones, they work in Gaza, they work in the Sudan. These are the soft powers that South Africa has, which I think keeps the country going forward. Even when you think, oh God, it's really going off the rails, and people begin to write about and speak about a failed state, it's these countervailing forces in our society which keep us on track, and which I feel we really are truly in gift and in gratitude to them.
Thank you for that, and I echo it very strongly. And I think we do need to get involved as individuals. We keep hearing it, but we don't really have the right to criticize if we're not doing anything ourselves in any way that
Yeah.
we can, in the smallest possible way. But
And
thank
we often have resources we don't realize. Sometimes it can be just funding organizations like OUTA or Gift of the Givers in small monthly amounts, or that we have skills that we can give and which they'd love to be able to utilize these days with easy access to them. I find if you go onto their websites, you can often find a way to be of service to these organizations, or even just in our local communities.
Thank you, Ferial. I will continue to subscribe to Daily Maverick. It's my starter every day, and it continues to shine a
Thank
light
you.
where we think it's all dark. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Stu. Have a lovely day.